In decisive fashion, Houston voters award Sylvester Turner a second four-year term as mayor. In the most expensive race this city has ever seen, how and why did the incumbent prevail? In the nation's capital, the impeachment drama unfolds. As America watched, did Democrats make a compelling case that the president truly abused his power? And here at home, the killing of two courageous peace officers triggers multiple controversies. Has criminal justice gone soft in Harris County? And did HPD's outspoken chief cross the line? I'm Greg Groogan, and welcome to What's Your Point, where our panelists call it like they see it. Let's greet them. Starting us off, Bob Price, Associate Editor of Breitbart Texas. Next up, legal analyst and Houston attorney Carmen Roe. In the three spot, Charles Blain, founder of the advocacy group Urban Reform. Batting cleanup, longtime super neighborhood leader Tomaro Bell. Next up, conservative lawyer and Second Amendment expert Michele Maples. And closing us out on the hot corner, writer, educator, and radio host Antonio Diaz. Let's begin with the results from the runoff election. After much sound and plenty of fury, Mayor Sylvester Turner has been given another 4 years to lead the city.
Whether you voted for me in this election or not, it matters not to me. When this night is over, the slate is clean, and I am your mayor.
The margin of victory over challenger Tony Buzbee, a solid 12%. Panel, how and why did Turner capture this reelection? I'm going straight to Charles Blain.
It's a game of turnout. I mean, and he did it. He activated his base. I think Turner, you just saw it in that clip. He has a great way about him when it comes to getting people excited, when it comes to really getting people to feel that they should be engaged and they should buy into it, and he was able to pull that off. But the thing is, what follows election season is accountability season, and if you were involved before, if you were supporting a candidate before, hoping things would change, you need to stay involved, because when this new council is sworn in, there's going to be a lot of changes that need to be made in this city, and you need to put your effort forward. If you can block walk for a candidate, if you can phone bank, you can spend some time reaching out to your city council member. So I really hope that folks who are sad now that they lost stay involved, stay engaged, and push for the changes they wanted to see, because governance happens every day. Election season happens once every 4 years.
Okay, Tomaro Bell.
All right, listen, today is a good day. First off, this has been a very emotionally draining on the entire city, and it's not just about who got their people come out to vote. It's those who couldn't engage people to get them to come out to vote. And all of this started at the end of the primary election. That is when people decided what they were going to do and where they were going to go. And some candidates were able to ignite people, because some people chose somebody that they knew and were afraid of somebody that they didn't know. And for the incumbents that won, that is because it is very difficult to beat an incumbent. And when you put out false lies and divisive language, especially the city of Houston's election is nonpartisan. But people kept talking about, oh, he's a Democrat, he's a Republican. It's a nonpartisan. You need to be voting about character, not about partisan or color.
Okay, partisan, though the mayor was with the Texas Democratic Party chair. We saw his opponent with former Governor Rick Perry. Bob Price, what's your take on all this?
Well, there's nothing nonpartisan about this election. It may be called a nonpartisan election, but there's nothing nonpartisan about it. And I'm sorry, did you say he had 4 more years to lead or to loot this city? So I think there's an interesting thing that went on here. I think the voters are just tired of all the corruption talk. They're worn out by it, whether it's at the presidential level or at the mayor's level. They're just worn out by it. They're not listening to it. They're not paying attention to it. And unless somebody gets put in jail, they don't care.
Okay, Tony.
Well, I think you saw the DNA for the landslide victory right there on the speech, because I saw the mayor speak several times. And every time I see him talk in front of a group of people, you can tell he enjoys it, and he really knows how to reach out to folks on their terms. And he's a social media warrior as well, because he's not saying one thing to one group and changing it up for the next. He's consistent, and I think that's really what was at it. He was at work. He made it clear he wanted to be the mayor. I'll also say that Latinos came out for the mayor. They may not have come out in different pockets because we still only have one Latino city council member as of today, but they came out for him, but he could appeal to us in a very specific way, including bringing out Sylvia Garcia, First Tejana Congresswoman, to bring out all the troops and say, here's your marching orders. So to me, it's pretty clear that he really wanted it. I think that's what the people wanted. But let's also make it clear, low turnout right after Thanksgiving, before Christmas, it really is the people who knew they needed to believe in someone. Last thing I'll say too, 30,000 vote undercount between who the mayor was and the lowest at-large seat. So that means 30,000 people came just for the mayor.
Okay, Michele Maples, back-to-back losses now for the Houston Professional Firefighters Association. I know that disappointed you.
Oh, absolutely. I thought the firefighters did a wonderful job at organizing, at block walking, at the signs. There is nothing else I think they could have done to throw their support first behind Dwight Boykins and then to Tony Buzbee. I am bummed out that Buzbee did not win, and unfortunately this is partisan, even though that, this utopia idea that we're not, one side or the other. However, again, Sylvester Turner, he has got this loyal base, and it doesn't matter. Bad act after bad act after bad act. They love him, and they are the people that show up, and he was the victor last night.
Okay, a dose of Carmen Roe pragmatism. What's your take on what went down?
I'm glad the slate's clean because we've all had plenty to say that's not positive about a mayor who's going to lead the city for the next 4 years. But I do think it's important that, one of his narratives after the victory was that you can not live in a big house or come from the ghetto and still lead the city, the fourth largest city. I think it's important to know that what Tony said in his speech was important. I think that everybody in Houston has let Sylvester Turner know that we're watching, that this kind of thing's not okay. And I hope he takes from this that we need to clean up Houston City Council. We need to clean up the City Hall to make sure that this kind of stuff isn't happening going forward. That's the message I hope people are getting, win, lose, or draw. Okay,
Buzbee rolled the dice, threw out a last-minute mailer on Drag Queen Story Hour, as well as okay, the Trump tweet.
Yes.
Real quick.
In the 48 hours before the election day, he sent out two methods of information. Both of them, I feel, were damning to him. The one he sent out about the LGBTQ and the one he sent out with the Trump tweet. Let me tell you, I was one of those people that was with Bill King, that both candidates were running after us. Please come vote for me. Please. I didn't vote until yesterday, okay? I didn't vote until yesterday. Those things that he sent out, those mailers, I'm telling you, that turned people off. That turned people off. And let me tell you, it was not a low turnout. The early voting in this runoff election was higher than the early voting in November.
Okay, got to leave it there. Still ahead, after a marathon of debate this week, the impeachment vote moves to the House floor. What's its future once it gets there? But first...
And who killed our sergeant? A boyfriend abusing his girlfriend.
The lives of two local officers taken in less than a week, a police chief's outrage, and the outrage over the outrage when we come back. Welcome back. We turn now to the crushing loss of two local law officers at the hands of two separate criminals. Murders separated by just 3 days. Sergeant Chris Brewster was gunned down after responding to a report of domestic violence. His alleged killer, Arturo Solis, was armed with 2 handguns despite a history of mental illness and criminal record, including assault. The killing triggered an angry public outburst from HPD Chief Art Acevedo aimed squarely at Republican lawmakers who've stalled gun control legislation in the nation's capital.
It's because the NRA doesn't like the fact that we want to take firearms out of the hands of boyfriends that abuse their girlfriends. And who killed our sergeant? A boyfriend abusing his girlfriend. So I don't want to see their little smug faces about how much they care about law enforcement when I'm burying a sergeant, because they don't want to piss off the NRA.
The Houston Police Officers Union quickly condemning the chief, accusing him, quote, of hijacking the somber moment to score political points, end quote. Michele Maples, I'm going straight to you on this.
Absolutely. All right, so I do not expect normal folks at home to be well versed in Texas law or federal law for that matter. However, I do expect Chief Acevedo to be well versed in Texas law. And here is the law in Texas. If there is any conviction for domestic violence, which this individual had here, he cannot possess a firearm. He was unlawfully in possession of that firearm. There is nothing that a federal law could have done to prevent this heinous act. Now, the Texas law actually goes much further than the federal statute. So if you have a protective order against you from anyone, you cannot lawfully possess a firearm. The definition of family member under the Texas statute is incredibly broad, so broad that it actually could cover a roommate that you had back in college. They could fit that definition. And so the fact that Chief Acevedo is going out and saying that it is Cornyn's fault, it is Cruz's fault for not voting for the Violence Against Women's Act is simply political. And we can all use this as a teaching moment. Chief Acevedo, number one, it's already against law. In fact, it is here in Texas, it is unlawful to actually transfer a firearm to this individual. So whoever he got these guns from also committed a crime.
Tony, I know you're an Acevedo fan, and was he out of line in any way to take this national at that time?
He was not. And in fact, if Republicans are to talk about redundant laws, they just spent the last election passing redundant laws. Laws for things that already apply, like no income tax, that's redundant. So they don't have any leg to stand on as far as that goes. I'm proud of the chief looking for what killed one of his officers. That's smart for him to go after the people who are stalling that law. And here's what I love about what the chief did. He spoke eloquently, passionately, and it wasn't politically correct. In fact, it's not popular for him to stand up and do that. I'm going to add to it. You want to go political? I'll make it political. I will make this political. He can also do it in Spanish and English. That's what a Latino formidable candidate looks like. Go, Chief. I'm not endorsing him because he hasn't announced yet. He might not want the pay cut, but those are the qualities I like in a leader. Thank you.
Okay, Tony. Hey, more on the deaths of two courageous peace officers and the controversy over the incredibly low bond initially granted to a confessed cop killer. Stay with us. Bob Price is going to talk. Welcome back. We return to our discussion of two courageous Houston area police officers whose lives were taken by different criminals. Just 3 days after HPD Sergeant Brewster was shot, Nassau Bay Police Sergeant Kayla Sullivan was fatally struck by the vehicle of a fleeing suspect wanted on multiple criminal charges. Following the arrest of 21-year-old Tavares Henderson, there was an explosion of outrage after a Harris County magistrate initially set bond on the murder charge at $150,000. While that bond offer was rapidly revoked, critics have seized upon it as an example of criminal justice reformers cutting so-called sweetheart deals for dangerous suspects. Henderson is now charged with capital murder and could face the death penalty. Bob Price, take it away.
Well, this has been a horrific year for law enforcement officers in Harris County. We've had multiple fatalities, officers killed in the line of duty, and it's tragic. As far as the first one with the chief, you know, the cop was killed by a criminal committing a criminal act with a criminally possessed firearm. There is no law that you can write on the books that is going to prevent that. As for the killing down in the Clear Lake area, you know, we've got a problem in this county with the judges, not just this magistrate judge, but these Democrat elected judges that are dismissing charges blatantly across the board. And this judge setting a $150,000 bond for a man who murdered a cop and then ran from the scene, that is just absolutely absurd. Law enforcement officers from all across the state are condemning this action, but voters need to look at where this is coming from and be ready for the next election.
Carmen Roe, your legal expertise is needed.
Well, you know, that's what's missing here, maybe. I think Chief Acevedo, as usual, is high on emotion and low on facts. And so the fact that he would actually take over this young man's funeral services for these political statements is appalling. And if you don't think so, the fact that the Houston Police Officers Union condemned his comments tells you everything you need to know. The truth is that there was nothing that could have been done here. But even if there was, we don't know what those facts are. We don't know where these guns came from. We don't know a lot. What we did know is that we were there to honor his life and not to talk about politics. So I would condemn his conduct as well. shifting over, he can be upset about that $150,000 bond for this gentleman who allegedly ran down this officer. I mean, I watched the entire probable cause hearing, and it's one of those things where, you know, the DA's office would tell you he was not going to be released on that $150,000 bond because the magistrate said, you know what, there's another bond out there for another case, and I'm going to punt that to the district court judge and let that person decide what the bond is. So it's zero, but I'm going to set $150,000. What's crazy about that bond is he said he read the probable cause affidavit and he still thought that $150,000 was the right number. And so it's one of those things where I don't think anybody would justify or say that it's okay that he set that $150,000 bond. And I would say that there needs to be better restrictions or education going to these magistrates, because the magistrate who set the bond is an experienced lawyer. It's not like it's a person who doesn't understand that $150,000 bond is too low for what is now a capital murder charge.
Okay, that's bad messaging, at least in my mind, for criminal justice reformers. Do you agree?
I definitely agree. And let me be clear about this. Not all Democratic judges at the county have this issue, but some of them definitely do. I mean, what I can't wrap my head around is that in your attempt, which was needed for bond reform, that you are willing to risk the public, okay? Because these people who you're letting out at $5,000, $50,000, I heard horrific tales of a child molester who had told them, when I get out, I'm coming back, and this time I'm gonna get both of your kids, whether they molested, on a $50,000 bond. I mean, there has to be a balance here. It's unconscionable that anybody, I don't care if you're a lawyer or not, you know $150,000 is not what you put on somebody who has ran over an officer fleeing a crime. That's common sense. And the uncommon values that some of these people have, they should not be in a robe making judgments over people in our county that are going to put other people in the county in danger.
Okay, Charles Blain, your thoughts?
Yeah, I want to pull a line from Carmen where she said that Chief Acevedo was high on emotion and low on facts, and I think that we see that a lot. I mean, with his first press conference about Sergeant Brewster, he said, you know, the vest was pierced, and then he came back and said, oh, it might not have been, and there's just misinformation going back and forth. But I think the problem is, the underlying problem here is that he took the attention away from the family and took the attention away from the situation. I received a message from a law enforcement professional here in town shortly after this, and just to read shortly what he said, I won't say his name, but he said, to think that this police chief used this man's death as a platform to push his activism and political agenda makes me so sick. This was so hard. God help us. And so it's heartbreaking to hear that people feel that way when he just wants to take he wants to take away the attention from this family to push whatever personal agenda he has, and it's frustrating.
15 seconds.
One final thing on this. I asked HPD where this gun came from. They refused to release that information. So the police chief goes out and makes these political statements but refuses to release the information as to where the gun comes from. That's just not right.
I'm sure we'll revisit this issue. Okay, straight ahead. It looks like peace may replace conflict in America's costly trade war with China. What's your point? We'll be right back. Welcome back. Knock on wood, fingers crossed, Lord willing, and the creek don't rise. All apply to news this week of a looming trade deal with China, confirmed by the Chinese. Stepping back from the precipice of a deepening trade war, the president trumpeted massive agricultural product purchases and what he described as many structural changes. Best case scenario for Republicans, a trade truce with the Chinese, and the generally healthy state of the economy give Mr. Trump a formidable argument for another term. That sound right, Bob?
It does sound right. This president has done some amazing things when it comes to trade. When you look at China, we have a deal here apparently, and it's a smaller deal than we may have wanted in the beginning, but it's the opportunity now to put this in place and monitor China and make sure they comply with it and make sure that they're going to carry it out before they move on to the bigger steps of this. But you've also got the USMCA trade agreement to replace NAFTA now that finally Nancy Pelosi decided to do something with, and that also is going to create lots of agricultural jobs for Americans selling products both to Mexico and to Canada.
Okay, Tony, you can't deny the economic numbers. We got low unemployment. If this China deal goes through, that's a pretty tough road to hoe for Democrats in the fall.
Well, if Trump is scoring some runs on the economy, it's because President Obama loaded the bases for him. However, I will add this. What's good is, in this specific lane, I want prosperity for all of us. A trade war with China is not good news. The only thing I worry about is that we don't have specifics. We don't have a specific timeline. But let's not go into trade war with China. Let's help all Americans make money. Let's make it a global economy.
Okay, Maples, go.
I don't think Obama did anything for trade.
You would.
By the way. Actually, I know. I don't just think. So with regards to China, we have a $480 billion with a B deficit with China. We are being taken advantage of by China, and I am glad that something is finally changing. This is great for agriculture, and this is great for manufactured goods to start shipping products over to China, and it can be a little bit more fair. Phase 1, almost done. I look forward to phase 2.
Okay, quick response.
I am so happy to hear a Republican use the word deficit because they want to talk about the economic stability of the United States. Our deficit is at the highest that it's ever been, but nobody wants to talk about that.
Blain.
Yeah, the economic stability is strong, like they yell in the State of the Union when they're talking about the
Yeah,
State
but your
of the
credit
Union.
cards are high.
But, you're talking about it. Unemployment is incredibly low. We're on the precipice of a trade deal. The economy's doing great. I think people are feeling that when they're looking at their investments, their assets. They're feeling really well about what's going on. And so I think the Democrats, as you said, are going to have a tough road to hoe in trying to make the president look as though he's not doing a good job when people feel great and their lives look great.
Okay, there was a famous Democrat who said it's the economy, stupid, and we're 9 months away. What do you think, Carmen?
I think this is what a lot of people don't understand about why Trump is successful. People get behind him because he makes good deals, because he's bringing the economy to the place they want it to be, and that's why they're willing to ignore so many of the other things going on. And as long as he continues to reinfuse this economy, I think he's good in 2020.
We'll keep an eye on it. Okay. Coming up, a punishing week of hearings produce historic articles of impeachment, it's early, against the president with a vote of the full House looming. Have Democrats convinced a majority of Americans their prosecution is just? Stay with us. We're going to talk about it. Welcome back. The impeachment of President Donald J. Trump lurched another major step forward in a process so excruciating many Americans can only absorb it in limited portions.
This has got to stop before it goes too much further.
He has a gun to his head. The gun is the fact that the President of the United States, upon whom he depends for military aid,
have a rigged and rushed process when you can't accept the will of the American people.
Just a sampling of the hour after televised hour of fiercely partisan acrimony. Friday morning, by a vote of 23-17 along strict party lines, the democratically controlled House Judiciary Committee approved 2 articles of impeachment, abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. The full House will vote this week. With an acquittal by the Senate a certainty, some moderate Democrats in swing districts may be unwilling to fall on Speaker Pelosi's political sword. So what do we make of this week's development? Carmen Roe, I go to you.
Well, this whole thing is just exhausting. And the worst part is I think it makes a mockery of what due process is actually supposed to look like. That's not what this is. That's why it's going to be a vote on party lines. It's why it's going to die in the Senate. And on the one hand, it's like no harm, no foul. On the other hand, like I said, it gives this impression that you can actually file charges against somebody with this kind of weak evidence and a bunch of professors talking to us about what abuse of power might look like or could be. I don't think they have it here, and I think it's doing more damage than good for everybody in the country.
The Trump legal team may be calling you. Bob Price.
You got the weakest articles of impeachment that have ever been written in history, so it was historic. The only thing bipartisan about this investigation are the votes against impeachment, because Democrats are joining Republicans in voting against this. So the abuse of power, there was no abuse of power. The reason we know there was no abuse of power, because the whole thing about quid pro quo and bribery has all been dropped, so there was no abuse of power here. There was no quid pro quo. And as for the obstruction of Congress, that is a laugh. Congress has a remedy if the president claims executive privilege and doesn't send people to testify or doesn't provide documents. It's called the court system. But Congress wouldn't go to the court system because they don't have time. They have to rush this through before Christmas. This is all politics. It's all show. They know it's not going to remove the president of the United States. If I was a Democratic voter who had been banking on the promise of getting rid of this president, I would be ticked off at this point.
Okay, Tony, Democrats say they're acting on principle, not politics. Is this worth the political roll of the dice?
Definitely, because the president is not above the law. Also, I want to remind the Republicans they owe me They owe me so much time for the Benghazi fiasco that they did that resulted in no convictions and nothing really. So please, they need to step back when they're talking about frivolous, experiments in democracy. This is all about democracy because the president is not above the law. He's abused the law. And here's what it comes down to. President Trump always reveres the dictator of Turkey. He got elected democratically and pulled the same stunt where he chips away at the power that the president could have. He's testing every level of power. He's crossed the line. He must respond back to the people. I'm proud of every politician that will say, you've gone too far, President Trump. They need to keep him in place.
Charles Blain, net, is this a loser for the Democrats?
I think so, because I think, like Bob said, you see some Democrats who are kind of falling off of the fray. I mean, Congresswoman Lizzie Fletcher came out with a statement saying she was going to support both of them, and she's going to be in a tough re-election battle. But then you have a House representative from New Jersey who said that he's going to leave the party over this. So I think you're going to see a fracturing of the Democrats over this because they know, I think many of them know, that it's baseless. And so a lot of them are just towing the line because they have to do so politically, but I think they're going to have a price to pay in November. So you're going to start to see a fracturing of these folks who are concerned about their re-elections.
Okay, I think there are a lot of Americans who say, I don't think what the president did was exactly right, but was it criminal? What's your take, Tomaro Bell?
When I hear them say that this is baseless, the testimony that Congress listened to was mostly from Trump appointees, not Obama appointees, Trump appointees, about what they had concerns about his actions. So don't say this is baseless and all of that. My problem with this, and I said this on the show, I did not want to have him impeached because I knew that he couldn't be impeached in the Senate. Not because I didn't think he had done anything wrong, but I knew that it would not succeed in the Senate. But Congress didn't look at it that way. They're like, if we don't do something now so that you know you can't get away with anything and everything just because you're president. Because you see, when Obama was president and the Republican Party, when they ruled, they were like, you can't do nothing because you're president. So I am very glad that they decided to take action, but it was the testimony of his appointees that brought them to where they are, not Obama's.
Okay. Michele Maples, closing argument.
Let's talk about testimony. No direct evidence, all hearsay, right? So there's nail in the coffin, number one. Number two, comparing this to Benghazi is an insult to the victims of Benghazi. Number three, if we recall a couple years ago when Eric Holder asserted his executive privilege, it was okay. But now all of a sudden, when the Republicans assert their executive privilege, it's obstruction and an impeachable offense.
Okay.
Go figure.
Bob
and it's
Price,
not politics. It's not politics.
Fast and Furious was Fast and Furious with Bob Price for a long time.
Yes, absolutely. The Holder withheld tons of documents. Hillary Clinton destroyed 60,000 emails that were under subpoena from Congress. But in this issue, the very witnesses that you're talking about with their hearsay evidence all said none of this rose to a crime, none of this rose to an impeachable offense. And the professors also, one of the professors at least acknowledged that this is not impeachable as well.
Okay, gonna leave it there.
Corrupt.
Still ahead, we return to the winners and losers in Saturday's city runoff election and gauge the likely fallout for the 4 years to come. So stick around. We'll be right back. Welcome back. There was never any doubt that this runoff election would trigger substantial change on Houston City Council. The only question was just how much and whether this fresh cycle would bring a dramatic progressive shift. Now we know. I want to start with District H, where incumbent Carla Cisneros has a whisker-thin 12-vote lead over challenger Isabel Longoria. With provisional and overseas votes potentially impacting this outcome, Longoria is not conceding. I'm going to Tony Diaz. What do you think of this race?
If you need to believe every vote counts, just look at this race. It's like 12 votes separate the two. And I think it's also an interesting where you've got two forces colliding, because you have the folks that endorsed Carla Cisneros, which is, you had Carol Alvarado, you also have Cristina Morales, and then you had the folks endorsing Isabel, Councilman Robert Gallegos, Tejana, Congresswoman Sylvia Garcia. So it seems to be this tug of power. I just hope we're all allies afterwards, because it's great to see progress in action for our community.
Tomaro Bell, pick your favorite race.
My favorite race was Michael Kubash's race. I am very happy to see that even though people wanted to throw, he's a Republican, he's this, his race and Knox's race, yet when the community knows who they've called on to help them when they couldn't get what they needed from their district council members. It was their at-large members who came and aided them, and I'm glad the community remembered and stepped up. And for the record, the early voting in this runoff election was higher than in November, so people were engaged during this Christmas, very small shopping season. They still came out and exercised their votes, and I was very happy to see that.
Charles Blain, you watch this stuff closely.
Yeah, so it's going to be interesting to see council move to the left a little bit, right? So we have outgoing council members Jack Christie and Steve Lee being replaced by Republican council members being replaced by Democrats. You have arguably a conservative Democrat, Dwight Boykins, being replaced by a new Democrat who's probably going to be a little further to the left. Carla Cisneros, if she has any political future, she might move to the left if she stays on council if she's looking to run for office in the future. So we might see a shift to the left. And then Turner's in his second term. We're not worried about re-election, so he might release this progressive agenda that a lot of the progressives have been waiting for. So I think we're going to see this marked shift to the left of council going forward.
Bob, is this just another step towards the deepening blue nature of Houston, Texas inside the Beltway?
Well, it certainly looks that way. The city has gone from solid red to purple to now solid blue in just a very short period of time, and joining other cities like Dallas and Austin and San Antonio. So it's from my perspective, it's a sad thing to see, because I think there was a nice balance when you had a mixture of Republican judges and Democrat judges, and you have some balance on city council. But it's a strong mayor form of government anyway, so the council can't really stop the mayor from doing much of anything. And now he feels he has a mandate, so he can do whatever he wants to do.
Okay, Michele, anything to add?
Well, the shift to the left is disappointing for those of us who lean more conservative. However, I think it is important that those of us with the conservative values continue to voice our opinions to those who represent us, either in city council, and I know Sylvester Turner obviously listens to everything I say, so.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Okay. Up next, the swirling blue storm that dominated Saturday's city election. In our hot seat, the Swami Rice political analyst Mark Jones to break it all down, so don't go away. Welcome back. When it comes to political forces, he rarely makes a wrong call. It's acumen, according to his lovely wife and two daughters, that doesn't always extend to everything else. Kidding aside, it's great to have Professor Mark Jones of Rice University back in the hot seat.
Pretty much everything that doesn't have to do with politics.
Okay. Let's face it, going into this election, Turner had a load of adversity. Open warfare with popular firefighters, allegations of pay to play, opponents from both the right and the left, millions of dollars of negative ads aimed his way, and yet the mayor won pretty easily. What happened?
Well, the mayor had several advantages going in. First, people are relatively satisfied with how things are going in the city of Houston, and so it's really difficult to oust an incumbent when people are satisfied. A second factor is that Turner has all the power of being mayor, and our mayor is very powerful. People, particularly donors, are very loath to cross them, meaning it's almost impossible for other people other than the mayor to raise money. So he had that advantage. And then his opponents, the principal one, Tony Buzbee, had the misfortune of being, both by his own actions as well as the very skillful Turner campaign, linked to Donald Trump, who is incredibly unpopular in the city of Houston.
Okay, well, let's talk about Buzbee. Looking to make up ground, Buzbee rolled the dice. Last-minute mailer at hard right voters, bringing up Turner's support of the HERO ordinance and the controversial drag queen story hour. And then that last-minute text from the president. Ultimately, was all that stuff a mistake?
Maybe not the text from Donald Trump, because in the end, that was a way to boost turnout. I think the anti-LGBTQ ad is something that'll probably come back to haunt him, in that it didn't help him all that much, but it will hurt him moving into the future, particularly in terms of his image among many Houstonians.
Mark, looming over the city election was the sharp political shift of Houston, Texas, at least inside the Beltway, from purple to, as you've called before, very solid blue. Given the demographics, will Houston be a Democratic stronghold moving forward?
Oh yeah, Houston is a blue city now, and you see that with Turner's victory. That is about 55% of Houstonians identify as Democrats. He won a little more than that in terms of the vote. And we're also seeing it on council. I think one shift that we're likely to see that exacerbated by and even pushed in terms of a more progressive direction is in terms of electoral reform. One thing that I think a lot of people are going to notice is that we're a city that's 45% Latino, yet we're only going to have one Latino, Robert Gallegos, on council. That's 6%. So we're going to probably see a move away from at-large districts, or at least people trying to get rid of those, and that would even reduce the conservative influence even further.
Speaking of those at-large districts, two conservative incumbents, Mike Knox and Michael Kubosh, held on to their seats, and they did it handily. What does that tell you?
Well, it tells you that despite the partisanship, even though these are nonpartisan elections, being a solid council member, having a good relation with the community matters. And both Kubosh and Knox have done a very good job as council members. They've won the support not only of Republicans, but also of independents and Democrats for simply being good council members.
Okay, Mark, if you're Sylvester Turner, what do you do with the next 4 years?
Well, I think a lot of that will depend on what Sylvester Turner wants to do when he leaves office as mayor. If he desires a future political post, we may see him adopt more partisan type positions like Anise Parker did during her final term. If, on the other hand, he plans to ride on into the sunset, I would see him just trying to lay a solid foundation for Houston's future growth.
Hey, I got a little extra time here. As you've watched this District B debacle, what are your thoughts?
Well, it's really sad. I mean, I think overall, in the end, the most negative impact will be that virtually no one will turn out and vote in that election when they hold it. My general view is that while Bailey shouldn't have been allowed to run, once she was on the ballot and there was an actual vote, you should respect what the voters wanted to do and hold the runoff, and it should have been held yesterday.
Mark Jones, thanks for being here. The good news is you'll be back.
I will. Thank you.
All right, up next. The courts deliver a colossal blow to funding for the border wall, plus new legislation approved by the House delivering legal status to 1 million undocumented farm workers. Both critical topics front and center when we come back. Welcome back. We turn now to border security and immigration. This week there were two significant developments flying somewhat under a national radar clouded by impeachment. First, two federal judges, one in Texas, one in California, blocked the Trump administration's plan to draw down $3.5 billion in military funds to finance part of the border wall. In issuing a permanent injunction, El Paso Judge David Briones ruled that diversion military funds through the National Emergencies Act was unlawful without congressional approval. Now, on a more conciliatory note, the House passed legislation that could put more than 1 million immigrant agricultural workers on a path to citizenship. The measure, approved with bipartisan support, would allow undocumented farm laborers to seek certification for legal status. It's good for 5 years. Under the legislation, those approved could seek renewal or pursue permanent legal status with a green card. Critics are on the right say this Farm Workforce Modernization Act amounts to mass amnesty. Bob, I read a Breitbart article, and they weren't in favor of that.
No, not at all. It's on the border wall first. This is another cherry-picked judge making a ruling against Trump. It's going to go to the Supreme Court again, and we'll see what happens on that. On this amnesty bill for farm workers, this is going to grant amnesty to over 1 million people who entered this country illegally, plus their families. If you want to have a guest worker program, let's bring in people that we identify in a foreign country, bring them in here, let them work legally, and let them go back home after their work is done. That's the way a farm worker program is supposed to work. This issue is just blanket amnesty.
Okay, 300 agricultural associations, trade groups, are in favor of this.
I would think so.
Tony, are you in favor of it?
I think it's brilliant. You've got right-wingers already trying to put a negative stereotype on it by calling it an amnesty law. It's not an amnesty law, it's a modernization law. But let's pretend it's an amnesty law. It's amnesty for illegal Americans, because illegal Americans are going to keep hiring undocumented labor because they need the cheap labor. And if there's a trade war, they're going to need even more cheap labor. So it's amnesty for illegal Americans because now they won't have to hide and lie about all the undocumented labor that they're going to keep hiring. And let's get something straight. These workers, they're here. They will still be getting hired because we need them to pick vegetables, lettuce, tomatoes. If you like your pico de gallo, there's somebody picking it at a rate that's not fair. So let's make it fair. And this way, workers can get jobs and not get exploited as much as they're getting exploited. And the same owners won't have to lie, cheat, and steal from the government and lie about hiring the undocumented. It makes sense.
I got about 20 seconds.
Look, I definitely believe this is something that they should move forward on. These people come here for agricultural season. They stay and they migrate as different crops grow at different times. They are here. The farmers couldn't survive without them. When they raided this place in Alabama, all of those sweet potatoes, I'll never forget that, rotted because they had nobody to pick them. They need to find some path to legalize them. And this is the way, because only they get punished, not the people that hire them.
Got to leave it there. We'll continue the conversation after this quick break. Welcome back as we continue our discussion of a major legal setback for the border wall and House approval of a major immigration reform benefiting more than 1 million undocumented farm workers. Charles Blain, take your pick there. You know, I was going to say big ag's under fire. They say they should be, or their critics say they should be modernizing the way they harvest crops, not counting on humans. Go.
Yeah, well, sure. That's a bigger investment. So they want the cheaper labor. So, of course, they're going to be in favor of it. And tomorrow, you know, she talked about Alabama crops. Well, I have family in Alabama that would more likely want these jobs to go to low-income Alabamians than go to people who broke the law to come here. And so I do take issue with this mass amnesty perspective because, you know, you are bringing these people in, and it's not a true guest worker program, as Bob said. If we want to do that, let's do that, and let's let them work, and then they go back when they're done with that. Let's not just make them citizens and allow them to break the law and then reward them for doing so.
There's a whole 30 seconds for you and you. Go, Carmen.
Okay, aggressive and creative is what Trump has always been. That's exactly what these requests for funding is, which, by the way, I don't think has anything to do with Mexico paying for the wall, but I digress. Anyway, so it's going to go to the Supreme Court, but I don't think it's going to be pushed through because I think it's just their effort at trying to get some of that money on the wall. I don't think it's going to work. As far as the labor and the farmers, I would just say what I've said before. We need a plan, an immigration plan, and this is an effort at that plan. And so is it perfect? Is it going to work in every way? Are they paying taxes? I don't know. But I think it's something that we need to start implementing as far as change and plans that can give these families some sort of solace, because right now they are criminals and they can be arrested and deported at any time.
20-second cap from Michele Maples.
All right, real quick, with regard to the judgment that came down in El Paso and California, Clinton appointees, we all saw this coming. No surprise there. It will be, for the El Paso judgment, it'll be kicked to the Fifth Circuit, which it'll go all the way back up to the Supreme Court, which will be fun to watch. Now, with regards to this Modernization Act, here's my deal. If you're here and you're not going anywhere, right, this just seems to be rewarding bad behavior, and I don't like that. Now, here's the deal, though. Let's pay taxes. Are these people going to be paying taxes? Because that is the slam dunk for me.
Got to leave it there. We'll continue the political discussion on a national level. Coming up, Chris Wallace sits down with former FBI Director James Comey in an exclusive interview about the DOJ's Inspector General report. Fox News Sunday starts